My fiancé told me I couldn't meet his parents, claimed they wouldn't even show up at the wedding. I thought it was odd, but what I found out when I secretly dug deeper, it changed everything. Stay with me as I walk you through what really happened, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to show some love by subscribing, liking, and sharing it. Latrice Coleman was 29, a hardworking graphic designer with a calm but creative spirit. She believed in love, even after a few bad relationships in the past. When she met Malik Henson, a 34-year-old sales executive with smooth words and a charming smile, she thought her luck had finally turned around. Malik knew how to sweep her off her feet, lavish dinners, little gifts, promises about the future. He spoke confidently about the life they would build together, and Latrice, who had always dreamed of a stable family, was drawn in. But from the start, one thing never sat right with her. Whenever she asked about Malik's family, his tone would shift. He would smile but quickly shut down the conversation. He told her they wouldn't be at the wedding, and that it was better she didn't meet them. His excuse was always the same. They live far, and it's complicated. Just trust me. At first, Latrice tried to brush it off. Every couple has their secrets, she told herself. Maybe he had a falling out with them. Maybe there was pain he wasn't ready to talk about. Still, the more the wedding plans moved forward, the stranger it felt. Latrice was excited about dresses, flowers, and venues, but Malik didn't seem interested in letting her handle much of it. He wanted control over everything, costs, vendors, even the guest list. When she pushed back, he'd say, "Don't stress, baby. I got this." And though his voice was smooth, his eyes carried a sharp warning, one that told her not to press too hard. Late at night, Latrice often found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Why would a man who claimed to love her so deeply hide something as important as his family? Why didn't he ever let her meet them, not even casually? She remembered once asking if they might call his mother, just to say hello. Malik snapped, "Drop it, Latrice. They won't be at the wedding. That's the end of it." Her doubts started to gnaw at her. She loved him, yes, but love without honesty was shaky ground. The small lies became more noticeable. The late-night phone calls he silenced quickly, the defensive attitude whenever she mentioned money, the way he brushed off her concerns with charm, but never with real answers. Deep down, Latrice knew she couldn't ignore the red flags forever. She wanted to believe Malik was the man he pretended to be, but the truth had a way of pressing through cracks. And as much as she tried to stay calm, her instincts whispered one thing. Something wasn't right, and sooner or later, she would have to face it. The closer the wedding day came, the more Latrice felt her doubts growing. She had always been the type to trust her gut, and her gut was screaming at her now. Every time she tried to bring up Malik's family, the conversation would crash into a wall. He would change the subject, joke his way out of it, or sometimes snap with a sharp edge in his voice that made her drop it immediately. "They're not important," he'd say. "Why are you so focused on them? I told you already, they won't be at the wedding." At first, she tried to be understanding. Not every family was close. Some people carried wounds they weren't ready to share. But the secrecy was heavy, almost suffocating. It wasn't just about his parents anymore. Malik wanted control over every single detail of their wedding, and not in a sweet, helpful way. He didn't want her opinion, her creativity, or her choices. Whenever she mentioned a flower arrangement or a dress design, he would wave her off. "Let me handle it," he'd say. "You don't need to stress about anything." But Latrice knew herself. She loved planning, she loved details, and this was her wedding too. The more Malik shut her out, the more she felt like a guest instead of a bride. Vendors would call her with questions, only to realize Malik had already made decisions without her. She found out he had canceled a few of her choices without telling her, replacing them with things she didn't even like. It wasn't just frustrating, it felt controlling. The nights were even worse. Malik would step outside or into another room when his phone rang. Sometimes he'd lower his voice so much she could barely hear a word. Once, she caught a glimpse of a message that flashed across his screen. Just a first name and a heart emoji. When she asked who it was, he laughed, grabbed her hand, and said, "Don't be paranoid, babe. You know you're the only one for me." His tone was light, but his eyes were cold, daring her to push further. Latrice felt like she was being gaslit. Her doubts weren't small anymore. They were filling every corner of her heart. And she couldn't keep it to herself. So one evening, she met up with Shanice Douglas, her best friend since college. Shanice was bold, outspoken, the kind of friend who never sugarcoated anything. Over coffee, Latrice spilled everything. The parents she couldn't meet, the hidden phone calls, the way Malik took over all the decisions. Shanice leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her face set with that no-nonsense look Latrice knew well. "Girl, you need to stop ignoring the signs," she said firmly. "Something ain't right, sis. You better dig before you end up in something you can't get out of." Those words echoed in Latrice's mind long after they left the cafe. She wanted to believe Malik, wanted to trust that love was enough. But Shanice was right. The pieces didn't fit, and pretending everything was fine wouldn't make the truth disappear. Latrice knew it was time to stop brushing things off and start looking deeper. Latrice sat at her desk one night, staring at the growing pile of unanswered questions. She couldn't shake Shanice's words from her head. Something wasn't right, and no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise, the doubts were winning. Malik had promised her he'd already taken care of the florist, the photographer, and even the caterer. But her instincts told her to double-check, just to put her mind at ease. She started making calls. The florist politely told her no deposit had been made, and the date wasn't even secured. The photographer's tone was the same. Malik had inquired but never followed through with any payment. When she called the caterer, the woman on the other end said she remembered Malik stopping by, but no contract was signed. With every answer, Latrice's stomach dropped lower. He had looked her in the eyes, swearing he had handled everything, yet nothing was in place. She hung up the last call and sat frozen, her phone heavy in her hand. If he was lying about something as basic as deposits, what else was he lying about? The thought twisted in her chest like a knife. Malik's charm had always been enough to silence her doubts before, but now the cracks were impossible to ignore. That night, she opened her laptop and decided to do her own digging. She started small, basic searches on Malik's background. She remembered he once mentioned his hometown being far away, too far for his family to travel. But a quick search of his old high school, based on details he'd casually dropped over dinner, told her something different. The school was barely 20 minutes away. His whole story about distance fell apart in seconds. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through alumni records and old addresses. Everything pointed to him growing up close by, which meant his parents weren't far at all. They were near, maybe even living in the same city. So why did he make it sound like they were unreachable? Why was he hiding them from her? Confusion turned into anger. She couldn't keep stumbling in the dark while Malik spun his stories. She needed the truth, and she needed it from someone who couldn't be charmed or manipulated. That's when she thought of Andre Tate. Andre was a private investigator recommended by one of Shanice's co-workers. He was known for being discreet, professional, and brutally honest. It took Latrice 2 days to gather the courage, but eventually, she dialed his number and explained her situation in a shaky voice. She felt guilty, like she was betraying Malik by investigating him. But the bigger betrayal was the one Malik was already living out. Andre listened carefully and assured her he would dig quietly, no one the wiser. Latrice gave him Malik's full name, the little details she knew, and waited. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of control returning. Whatever the truth was, Andre would find it. And Latrice braced herself, knowing deep down that the answers would change everything. Andre didn't take long. Just a week after Latrice hired him, he called her to meet at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Latrice sat at the corner table, her hands trembling around her coffee cup, her mind racing with possibilities. She half hoped Andre would tell her it was all in her head, that Malik was clean, that she had been overthinking. But the moment Andre slid into the seat across from her, she knew the truth wasn't going to be easy. He placed a small folder on the table, his eyes steady but serious. "I need you to prepare yourself," he said calmly. Latrice's heart thudded so loud she swore he could hear it. With a hesitant hand, she opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, photos, and public records. The first thing her eyes landed on was a marriage certificate. The groom's name read Malik Darnell Henson. The bride's name, Karina Foster. Latrice blinked, her vision blurring with disbelief. "Married?" she whispered, almost too soft to hear. Andre nodded. "Legally married. They tied the knot 5 years ago, and there's no record of a divorce." Her stomach flipped. It felt like the ground had opened beneath her. She had been planning a wedding with a man who was already someone else's husband. A sharp pain pricked behind her eyes, but she forced herself to keep reading. There were pictures, Malik and Karina at what looked like family gatherings, smiling like everything was normal. Karina was beautiful, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the kind of woman who looked like she poured herself into helping others. Andre's notes mentioned she was a social worker, dedicated to children and families. The betrayal cut deep. Malik hadn't just lied about his parents. He had built an entire double life. 2 women, 2 homes, 2 stories. Latrice pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting back the wave of nausea rising in her chest. She had given him her heart, her trust, her future, and all along, he had been living as if she were nothing but a side project. Andre leaned forward. From what I can tell, Karina doesn't know about you either. She's just as blindsided. The words made Latrice's head spin. She pictured Karina, somewhere across town, believing she was Malik's only wife, probably making dinner or planning her own future with him. It wasn't just her heart Malik was breaking, it was Karina's too. Tears slid down Latrice's cheeks before she could stop them. She felt humiliated, shattered, and furious all at once. She thought back to every late-night call he had hidden, every excuse about his family, every time he told her to just trust him. It all made sense now. The lies weren't just cracks in their relationship. They were the foundation. As Andre packed up his folder, he gave her a sympathetic look. I know this is a lot, but at least now you have the truth. The truth. It tasted bitter, heavy, and final. Malik wasn't the man she thought he was. He was already married, already bound to someone else. And in that moment, Latrice knew her life would never be the same again. Latrice spent 2 days staring at Karina's name and number written neatly on the piece of paper Andre had given her. Her hands would tremble every time she picked it up. She didn't want to be the one to destroy another woman's world, but keeping quiet meant living in Malik's lie. Finally, late one evening, she gathered her courage and dialed. Hello. Karina's voice was soft, polite, unsuspecting. Latrice's throat went dry, but she forced the words out. Hi, my name is Latrice Coleman. I know this might sound strange, but I need to talk to you. It's about Malik Henson. There was a long pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Karina's tone changed instantly, wary and defensive. What about Malik? Latrice steadied herself. Please. I think we've both been lied to. I don't want to do this over the phone. Could we meet somewhere private? After hesitation and heavy silence, Karina finally agreed. They chose a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. When Latrice arrived, Karina was already seated by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked exhausted, her eyes carrying the weight of someone who had already suffered more than her share. Latrice slid into the booth across from her, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would drown out her words. I'm engaged to Malik, Latrice began softly. Or at least I thought I was. But then I found out he's married. To you. Karina's face went pale. Her lips trembled as she whispered. Engaged? No, that can't be. She shook her head, tears springing into her eyes. We're still married. He's been telling me he's working late, traveling for business. I had no idea. Latrice pulled out her phone and showed her a picture of the 2 of them from their engagement party. Karina covered her mouth, stifling a sob. For several minutes, neither woman spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with betrayal and heartbreak. Finally, Karina broke it. You're not the first lie. He's been deceiving me for years. When we first got married, he told me he had big plans, business opportunities that would change our lives. I believed him. I loved him. I gave him everything. My savings, my trust, my patience. Her hands shook as she wiped her cheeks. And he drained it all. Every cent I had. Whenever I asked for updates, he'd get angry, make me feel guilty for doubting him. He said I wasn't being supportive. So I kept quiet. Latrice listened, her chest tightening with rage and sorrow. She thought she had been alone in this nightmare, but Karina had been living it even longer. They compared stories, Malik's excuses, his late nights, the way he manipulated them both. Piece by piece, they realized just how carefully he had built his web of lies. By the time their tea had gone cold, neither woman felt like a rival. They were 2 victims of the same man's deception, bound together by betrayal. And as they looked at each other across the booth, something unspoken passed between them. They both knew Malik's game was over. The meeting with Karina left Latrice shaken but strangely clear-headed. She had walked in expecting anger, maybe even a fight, but instead, she found a woman just as betrayed, just as broken. By the time they left the diner, a decision hung between them without needing to be spoken. Malik couldn't walk away from this unscathed. At first, Latrice thought about confronting him directly, screaming in his face, throwing the ring at him. But Karina stopped her. He thrives on excuses, she said bitterly. He'll twist your words, gaslight you, and somehow make himself the victim. He's been doing it to me for years. If we want to end this, we can't give him the chance to talk his way out." Those words planted the seed of revenge. Not quiet revenge, not walking away in silence, but a downfall so public and undeniable that Malik could never recover. Latrice agreed to keep up appearances. Around Malik, she smiled, laughed, and played the role of the excited bride-to-be. She let him believe his charm still worked, even when the sight of him made her stomach turn. She asked about the guest list, pretended to swoon over his choices, and even let him think he was in complete control. Every sweet word she gave him was laced with hidden fury. Karina, meanwhile, gathered her own evidence. Bank statements showing how he drained her savings, messages where he promised returns that never came, and photographs of them together throughout their marriage. She documented everything, determined that when the time came, there would be no escape for Malik. But it wasn't just the two of them. Shanice, fierce and unfiltered, became their anchor. When Latrice told her the truth, Shanice nearly threw her phone across the room in anger. "Oh, we're not letting this man get away with this. He wants to play games? Fine. We'll end his whole career, his whole image." Together, the three women met in secret. They sketched out plans late into the night. How the wedding would still move forward. How Malik would stay blind until the very last moment. How every guest would see the truth with their own eyes. Latrice would play her role flawlessly, smiling in photos, holding his hand in public, never letting him suspect a thing. Shanice made calls, helping arrange for invitations to quietly extend beyond Malik's circle. Friends, colleagues, distant relatives, all would be there to witness the reveal. Andre provided the legal documents. The marriage certificate proving Malik's double life, records of financial fraud, and a timeline that showed just how long he had been deceiving them. As the days passed, Malik grew more arrogant, certain he had pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. He strutted through their apartment, bragging about the perfect wedding he was planning, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Latrice watched him closely, her anger simmering beneath her calm smile. Every time he kissed her cheek or whispered, "Trust me, baby," she tightened her resolve. He thought he was in control, but the truth was the trap was already set. And soon Malik Henson would learn what it felt like to be exposed. Latrice played her part with precision. She sat beside Malik one evening, resting her head against his shoulder, and said softly, "You know, baby, I've been thinking. Maybe we don't need a huge wedding. What if we just kept it small, intimate, just the people who matter most?" Her voice carried the perfect mix of sweetness and hesitation, just enough to make him feel like it was his idea all along. Malik's eyes lit up, smug and satisfied. "That's exactly what I've been saying. Big weddings are a waste of money. You finally see it my way." He grinned, kissing her forehead. In his mind, he had won again, convinced she was still under his spell. The arrogance in his voice made Latrice's stomach twist, but she smiled anyway, hiding the fury burning behind her eyes. While Malik strutted around believing he had everything under control, Latrice, Karina, and Shanice moved quietly in the background. Andre worked tirelessly, pulling every document, every record, every scrap of proof needed to shatter Malik's facade. The marriage certificate came first, clear and undeniable. Then came the bank records, showing thousands of dollars siphoned from Karina's accounts into Malik's hands. There were even photos, Malik smiling at family events with Karina, proof of a life he had never mentioned to Latrice. Piece by piece, the evidence stacked into an airtight case. Meanwhile, Latrice pretended to help Malik with the guest list. He suggested only a few of his closest friends, keeping it tight and controlled. She nodded sweetly, but secretly began slipping in names of people Malik never expected. Colleagues from work, relatives he barely spoke to, even distant family members who hadn't seen him in years. Shanice handled the logistics, sending invitations discreetly, ensuring word spread just enough to draw a crowd Malik could never wriggle away from. Malik noticed nothing. He was too wrapped up in his own performance. He strutted through the days like a king, laughing about how smooth everything was going. "Man, when people see this, they'll know I'm living right," he told Latrice, puffing out his chest. She only nodded, biting her tongue, waiting for the day his arrogance would collapse. Karina stayed close, her quiet strength grounding Latrice when the act became too heavy. Sometimes Latrice wondered if she could actually go through with it, standing at the altar, smiling at the man she despised, pretending she was ready to marry him. But every time she saw Karina's tired eyes or thought about the lies Malik had spun, her resolve hardened. He had played with both of their lives. It was only right that his end came in the same grand stage he had tried to control. As the wedding day approached, everything was set. The venue was booked, the guests invited, and the evidence carefully packaged, ready to be unveiled. Malik, blind in his pride, had no idea. He believed he was walking into his victory. But in truth, he was walking straight into the trap that would strip him of everything. The day of the wedding arrived, and the air buzzed with excitement. The venue glowed with soft lights, flowers lined the aisles, and guests filled the seats, chatting and smiling as if nothing unusual was about to happen. Malik walked in with a wide grin plastered across his face, shaking hands, laughing, and soaking in the attention. He looked every bit the confident groom, certain he had pulled off the performance of a lifetime. Latrice, dressed in a simple but elegant gown, walked slowly down the aisle. Her heart pounded, but her face gave nothing away. To everyone watching, she was a radiant bride ready to begin her new life. Only Shanice and Karina, hidden in the wings, knew what was really coming. Latrice's hands trembled slightly as she reached Malik's side, but she forced herself to smile when he squeezed her fingers and whispered, "We made it, baby. Just wait until the vows." The ceremony unfolded with the usual rhythm, the officiant speaking warmly, the guests watching with admiration. Malik stood tall, smug and certain that he had won. Every word from the officiant was another moment closer to the trap snapping shut. When it came time for the vows, Malik leaned forward, ready to bask in the spotlight he craved. That was when Latrice glanced subtly to Shanice in the crowd. Shanice nodded. The signal had been given. The doors at the back of the hall opened and Karina stepped in. Dressed in a striking dark dress, she carried herself with calm strength, her eyes locked on Malik. Gasps spread across the room as heads turned. Malik's smile froze, his body stiffening as though he'd seen a ghost. "Karina," he muttered under his breath, his voice breaking. Karina walked steadily down the aisle, every step slicing through the illusion Malik had built. Guests whispered, confusion spreading like wildfire. She stopped near the front, her eyes never leaving his. "Surprised to see your wife, Malik?" she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The room fell silent. Malik's face turned pale as he tried to stammer out an explanation, but Latrice stepped forward before he could. Her voice rang clear. "He told me his parents wouldn't be at the wedding. He told me lies about his past. And while I was planning a life with him, he was already married to this woman right here." She reached into Shanice's prepared folder and pulled out the documents, his marriage certificate, the bank records, the photos. One by one, she held them up for everyone to see. Gasps and murmurs erupted as the truth spread through the crowd like fire. Malik shook his head wildly. No, this isn't what it looks like." But his words were drowned out by the weight of evidence. Karina's steady glare and Latrice's unwavering tone left him no room to maneuver. In front of friends, family, and colleagues, Malik's empire of lies crumbled. The confident groom who had walked in so proudly now stood exposed, humiliated, and powerless, his perfect day turned into his downfall. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Latrice dropped the final sheet of evidence onto the floor between them. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the collective shifting of guests in their seats. Malik's once proud grin had twisted into desperation, sweat dripping from his forehead. He looked from Latrice to Karina, and then back to the stunned faces of his colleagues and relatives. This isn't true," he shouted, his voice cracking. He snatched at the papers on the floor, waving them around wildly. "It's all a setup. They're jealous. They want to ruin me." But no one believed him. The marriage certificate bore his signature. The photos showed him with Karina in intimate, unmistakable moments. The bank transfers highlighted in red ink told the story of his financial betrayals. The crowd, once gathered to celebrate his new life, now shifted into a sea of accusing eyes. From the front row, Malik's own aunt stood up and shook her head. "How could you, Malik? Your father raised you better than this." The shame in her tone cut deeper than the evidence. His cousins whispered angrily, distancing themselves, while his co-workers exchanged disgusted looks. Karina stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her voice steady and merciless. "You stole from me, Malik. You drained our joint account to fund your new life with her. And when I questioned you, you gaslit me, made me think I was crazy. But today, you don't get to hide behind lies anymore." Her words hit like stones. Guests murmured louder, some audibly cursing under their breath. Malik's boss, seated 2 rows back, rose slowly, adjusting his tie with cold disapproval. "We trusted you with company funds, Malik. And now I have to wonder if this behavior extended to your work. Malik's eyes widened, his arrogance collapsing into panic. No, sir, please, you have to believe me. This was personal, not business. But his voice sounded hollow, pathetic against the tide of contempt. Latrice, still standing tall in her gown, added her final strike. You made me believe I was your future while you used me as a cover. I trusted you with my heart, and you turned it into a weapon. But today, you don't get to walk away clean. Everyone now knows who you are. The guests began to rise, some leaving, others staying just long enough to throw verbal daggers. Disgusting. Shameful. A liar. Malik reached out desperately to the closest relative, but they pulled their hand away as if touching him would burn. His reputation, once polished, once envied, crumbled in real time. Colleagues who once praised him now looked at him with disgust. Family members who once supported him turned their backs. Friends he bragged to were already whispering that they wanted nothing more to do with him. By the time the last document had been read aloud and Karina's final words echoed in the air, Malik stood alone in the center of the hall. The confident groom who had walked in surrounded by admiration was now nothing but a broken man, abandoned by everyone who once believed in him. When the last guest had left and the hall stood in awkward silence, Latrice calmly walked to the front, her gown flowing like a banner of victory. She turned to the wedding coordinator and said softly, "Cancel everything. There is no wedding." The words rolled through the empty space like a verdict. Malik, standing nearby, staggered as if he'd been struck. Vendors who had been waiting in the wings began to approach, faces tight with frustration. The florist waved a receipt, the caterer demanded final payment, and the venue manager crossed his arms, glaring. "Someone's paying this bill tonight," he said firmly. All eyes turned to Malik. For the first time in years, his charm failed him. His voice broke as he stammered, "Just give me time, I'll fix this." But there was no one left willing to believe him. Meanwhile, Karina wasted no time. Within days, she filed for divorce, her lawyer delivering the papers straight to Malik's crumbling apartment. She had already begun working with her bank to freeze joint accounts and recover what little she could of the savings he had drained. Each move she made was precise, deliberate, a quiet undoing of everything he had stolen. Malik, once smug and untouchable, now scrambled to keep his head above water. Word spread quickly. Malik's employer launched a quiet internal review, spurred by the public embarrassment of his double life. His colleagues whispered in corners, and clients withdrew their trust. Within weeks, Malik was let go, the official reason loss of credibility. His once booming social circle evaporated overnight. No one wanted to be seen standing beside him. Friends blocked his number, relatives stopped answering his calls, and even neighbors looked away when he passed. Latrice, on the other hand, walked away lighter than she had felt in years. She returned her engagement ring not out of sorrow, but with a sense of power. It was no longer a symbol of love, but a trophy of a battle she had won. She poured her energy back into her design business, landing 2 major contracts shortly after the scandal broke. Clients admired her resilience, and some even praised her bravery for exposing him. One evening, as she sat with Shanice and Karina over glasses of wine, Latrice smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. "We didn't just expose him," she said. "We freed ourselves." Karina nodded, relief etched across her face. Shanice raised her glass high. "To women who refuse to stay silent," she declared, and they clinked their glasses together. Malik's downfall was not loud anymore. It was quiet, steady, and irreversible. Every unpaid bill, every severed friendship, every closed door was another reminder that betrayal never stays hidden forever. And as Latrice watched her life open into new chapters, she knew she had turned his lies into her liberation. Betrayal had scarred her, yes, but it had also carved out a stronger, wiser woman who walked away not broken, but victorious. Do you think Latrice made the right choice by walking away and exposing Malik? Or should she have given him another chance to explain himself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this grab your heart, make sure to hit subscribe, drop a like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.